Welcome everybody to today's webinar on reframing healthy fats in everyday practice. I'm Tim Crowe and I have the pleasure of being your MC for today. And on behalf of the Olive Wellness Institute, Nuts for Life and Australian Avocados, I'd like to thank you for your time and interest in this topic today. So to start with, this project has been funded by Hort Innovation using the Olive and Avocado Research and Development Levies, contributions from the Australian Government and co-investment from the Australian nut industry. Hort Innovation is the grower-owned, not-for-profit research and development corporation for Australian horticulture. So today's topic for the organisations involved represents quite a collab, because whenever I need to contextualise the term healthy fats for the public in terms of foods, my top three are always avocados, nuts and extra virgin olive oil. And I'm sure for many of you, top of your list as well. Yet these are more than just healthy fats. They contain an abundance of beneficial nutrients and bioactive compounds. Yet despite this, there may be some hangover from the low-fat dietary messaging of days gone by. So this webinar aims to give context for the health benefits around the big three of the healthy fats group. And for that, there is no one better to do this than our speaker, Dr. Joanna McMillan, a name I know is very familiar with most of you today. Jo is a PhD qualified nutrition scientist, dietitian and lifestyle medicine expert. She's also an accomplished author, engaging speaker, visionary food futurist, nutrition consultant, passion cook and charismatic TV presenter, having hosted programs such as ABC Catalyst, Good Chef, Bad Chef, and has been a regular on the Today Show for almost 20 years. With 8 books and 4 audible audio originals under her belt, she brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to this talk today. And her TED Talk has captivated over 1 million viewers worldwide. And she speaks regularly at corporate, industry and public events, both locally in Australia and across the globe. So just before Jo starts off, there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end. So please make use of the Q&A box as questions come to mind, and I'll put them to Jo at the end for discussions. Also, this webinar is being recorded, so you have the opportunity to view it again afterwards. Enough from me, over to you, Dr. Jo.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you to all of you for joining me this lunchtime, although it's evening for me, because I'm actually talking to you from California, where I am with the Cobram Estate board and executive team, because we have olive groves now over here in California. So I'm speaking to you from our headquarters here in Woodland in Northern California. So thank you so much for joining me. But that also is a nice segue into just letting you know my disclaimer is that I am a board member and have been a consultant to Cobram Estate for some 15 or so years. But like Tim, whenever I've been talking, gosh, over the last 30 years, really, whenever I talk good fats, I always talk about extra virgin olive oil, avocado, nuts and seeds. That's always been actually in my personal Dr. Joanna plate model. I've got a slice for healthy fats and I've been using that for some 20 years. And that's exactly what's on my healthy fat slide. So it's so nice to have this collaboration to be able to talk about these particular foods all grouped together. And so I think this is a hugely important webinar, and I'm sure that between us that we can start to get this better messaging around how can we start talking about fats and healthy fats specifically to make sure that people are getting the right information. We do have, Tim used that term, the low-fat hangover, and I think it's such an apt term to really think about what's happened for those of you who are the age that we are, and you've watched these kind of evolution of nutrition over the last 2 or 3 decades. We do still have this, when I first studied nutrition and dietetics, we were very much in that low-fat stage. And it's taking us a long time to really get ourselves out of it. Now, while there are still some relevancy, of course, to talking about calories, to be talking about reducing saturated fats from certain forms, or at least in terms of what we replace saturated fat with, we've come a long way, but we seem to be having a struggle to really shake off what some of that messaging was. So despite the fact that we've made nutrition progress, we're understanding more about the quality of fats and the type of fats that we should be having in our diet, and the fact that one really important emphasis that I want to bring to you today is to talk about the importance of fat quality and the importance of where calories come from. It's no longer enough to judge a food based on calories alone, because we know the way those calories are partitioned within our body. In other words, what happens to them? What are they used for? And how many nutrients and fat we get and calories we get out of food vary between people, and they very much vary from foods. So that sort of calorie idea or calorie counting idea has really had to evolve, yet our dietary guidelines around the world really are struggling to keep up a little bit. So we have this issue that is common amongst the foods we're going to talk about today. Avocado, extra virgin olive oil, nuts and seeds are all under recommended and under consumed. And I'll give you some data on that in just a second. In Australia, our current Australian dietary guidelines have this lingering emphasis on lowering fat. We do have, when you dig down in to the guidelines, we've got these recommendations to replace saturated fat with both polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats. But when you look at the guide to healthy eating that the consumer may be looking at, oils are still excluded from core food groups. There's no differentiation given between oils, so there's no recognition of what might be different about a food like extra virgin olive oil compared to extracted and refined oils that are on the supermarket shelves. Is actually crazy when you look at the science. These are very, very different foods. Extra virgin olive oil has been part of the human diet for centuries, whereas, refined oils have been new to the human diet in the last 100 or so years. They are made up of healthy fats, and they do have some benefits in terms of replacing saturated fat, but what they lack are the phytonutrients that we're going to talk about a little bit more in a second. And then we've got a knock-on problem really from our dietary guidelines, which is the health star rating system. The algorithm is overly simplistic. It's welcome in terms of what it was originally designed for, in terms of packaged foods, but because it doesn't account for the complexity and the diversity of especially the minor components in these foods, nor indeed the food matrix and the complexity that happens when you eat whole foods, it's not enough to really be used for assessing these kinds of fresh foods. So it doesn't differentiate effectively. In fact, the algorithm gets it wrong when it comes to oils because it's solely looking at saturated fat. And then when we look at foods like avocado and nuts, there are some movements to, do we just give these whole foods 5 stars automatically? But then that's not using the algorithm. And there's arguments against that. It's confusing the way that the health star rating system is being used across the supermarket because people don't understand that they shouldn't be comparing different food groups. So we have to really think more about how do we communicate the benefits of these particular food, because the benefits are very, very clear. So let's start by thinking, first of all, about what is consumption, what are our dietary guidelines saying, and then what is coming out of research for each of these 3 different foods. So avocado, first of all, the consumption at the moment from our last National Nutrition Survey, we're awaiting, of course, results from our latest survey to come in, is somewhere around 3 grams a day across the board. And then if we look at people who state that they're avocado eaters, it's still only about 16 grams a day. Whereas in our dietary guidelines, a serving is recognised as being 75 grams because it's usually included, although avocado is a fruit, it's kind of assumed to be like a vegetable or consumed like a vegetable. So it's included in the veggie serves of being about 75 grams, and that's about half an avocado. Yet in research, we're definitely showing a benefit from half an avocado, but up to 1 avocado a day. So I think in the past, even amongst us dietitians, there was a hesitancy to really recommend too much avocado because we were concerned about the kilojoules or the calorie, the energy density of this fruit. Whereas in fact, what I'm going to show you today is that those concerns are unwarranted. And in fact, this is a food that we should be recommending in those type of serves. When we look at extra virgin olive oil, the average intake is only 5 to 6 grams a day. And our dietary guidelines here are really out of date in terms of a serving being only a teaspoon, and we're recommending 2 to 4 servings a day. So we're really under recommending and under consuming extra virgin olive oil. What we see clearly from research is that the benefits from extra virgin olive oil come from somewhere like 2 to 3 tablespoons a day. And indeed, levels are even higher in some of the more Mediterranean diet type studies that we see coming out of Spain and around the Mediterranean region. And then when it comes to nuts, we think of that healthy handful as dietitians. We've been talking about this for some time, and it is indeed that healthy handful that we see in our Australian dietary guidelines. But the dietary guidelines are suggesting 30 grams as a serving per day, but it's only an option in that meats and alternatives group. It's not being specifically specified as being a daily food and that we should have that healthy handful on most days. So what are people eating in Australia? Only about 4.6 grams a day. And if we look exclusively at people who report to be nut eaters, it's still only about 11.6 grams a day. So we're falling far short. And where we want to get is nuts being more of an everyday food. So let's dig a little bit deeper into each of these foods first to look at what do they contain, what is the nutrition, and then look at the research. And really, I've tried to highlight most of the most recent review type studies and things that have been published only in the last few years to give you the most up-to-date information. So avocados, we've got a new report out, which is fantastic for pulling together some of this information. So I will thank both the avocado people and the Nuts for Life and those at the Olive Wellness industry for their help in pulling all of this research together. But this is a lovely slide to sort of show you that we've got a tendency, I think, in our efforts perhaps to simplify nutrition information and certainly to try to simplify nutrition and food guidance, to overly simplify and not to give enough of the science. So I'm always encouraging you as nutrition leaders to give more of the science and actually help people to understand more of the nutrition. So an avocado is more than just a healthy fat. Those healthy fats are in there. It's mostly a monounsaturated fat. It's no mystery that avocado and olives are the two fruits that have a fat content, and they're both in that monounsaturated fat content, high in oleic acid. So it's not really a surprise that we see some of the same benefits. There's also some polyunsaturated, it's low in saturated fat. But avocado is also a tremendous source of fiber. I've very much got fiber in the brain because I've just submitted my manuscript, which is a fiber book that will come out next year. And I talk about avocado as fantastic source of fiber. And it's got this complexity of different fibers that are in there. So that's really, really important. And just like we're talking about the diversity that's required in all sorts of different nutrients, including the phytonutrients in our foods, we know that diversity of fiber is really important. We know that those phytonutrients that are present include things like various carotenoids. We've got phytosterols that can, of course, help with your blood cholesterol profiles, glutathione, and a whole bunch of different polyphenols, or more often we might see them called biophenols now. So we have this complexity of different nutrients that are present in these types of whole foods. Then we have micronutrients. Folate is standout for avocados. We get some vitamin E, which is the body's most important fat-soluble antioxidant rolling vitamin. But we also get vitamin K, and we get B5 and B6. A bunch of different minerals, including potassium, that's really important. You know, banana is kind of famous for its potassium, but actually there's more in an avocado, and that plays a very key role in blood pressure. Last week, or the week before last rather, I was at the Paris Nutrition Conference, and there was a lot of discussion around control of blood pressure, and it was very wonderful, I guess, to see that they were talking not just about sodium, but also about the importance of making sure we have enough potassium and, of course, magnesium. And then other things, of course, it's low in carbohydrate, low in sugars. That means it's low GI. It doesn't really have a GI because there's not significant carbohydrate there. But importantly, it aids in the absorption of those fat-soluble nutrients. And that's something that we forget about. When we talk about healthy fats, it's not just about the role of the healthy fats themselves, but the fact that we have not just fat-soluble vitamins, but we also have fat-soluble phytonutrients. So many of the polyphenols, your carotenoids, you need fat to absorb them and make use of them. Otherwise, we're not going to best make use of these things. So adding avocado into a meal has this knock-on effect. And the same is going to be true of our extra virgin olive oil and our nuts. So we have this very nice scoping review that's just been done by researchers at the University of the Sunshine Coast. Now, this I've taken from a poster they presented at the Paris conference just a couple of weeks ago. And this is a really lovely review, pulling together the evidence that we've got around avocado. And there's been a few of these different reviews recently that I'll share with you. The biggest amount of evidence is for avocados' benefits in cardiovascular health. So unsurprisingly, we see a lipid lowering benefit. So we see LDL cholesterol being pulled down and overall cholesterol levels. And we see this importance in not just risk factors, but with as little as half an avocado a day, you can lower overall cardiovascular risk. So you can see in that left-hand graph column there, cardiovascular health has got a huge amount of evidence. The dark green is our positive evidence. In this light green, you see mixed results with no positive outcome in the orange at the top. Importantly, when we look at body composition and weight management, this has always been our fear. If we're recommending higher calorie foods, is this going to have a negative effect ultimately on weight management? But it's not what we see in the research, particularly when combined with an energy restricted diet. And I think we forget that we can be including these kinds of foods even in an energy restricted diet. Consumption of up to a whole avocado a day, so not just half, can actually facilitate weight loss and promote reductions, especially in that visceral fat and central adiposity. So up to one avocado a day has not been found to be associated with unfavorable weight gain, and I'll show you some more evidence just in a second regarding that. Then when we look at some other effects like metabolic health, cancers, inflammation markers, and other types of outcomes, we see some effects, but we don't have enough studies yet to really give conclusions on these. And we need more studies to this effect. But the kinds of benefits that are being looked at, and we are seeing some positive results, are of course things related to glycemic control, to cognitive health and mental health outcomes in terms of mood, vascular outcomes, inflammatory markers, GI effects, musculoskeletal health, cancer risk, and skin health, which is actually shown to be quite positive with avocados. So let's delve in a little bit, because I know some of you will be concerned around the weight aspect, and it's certainly a question we're going to get from consumers and clients. Well, hang on a minute, I'm adding in all this extra fat, I'm adding in these energy dense foods, is this going to have an effect on my weight? So we have the HAT trial, which is a trial specifically looking at, it stands for Habitual Diet and Avocado Trial. So these are a group of studies. This was one of the first in Latina women, looking at giving them an avocado a day on top of their habitual diet. So the control group is just the habitual diet, who rarely have avocados. And then the intervention was simply giving an avocado a day. Adherence was fantastic, which shows that it's quite easy to add in a really tasty, healthy, lovely food into the diet. And over 6 months, there's no significant change in weight or waist circumference between those groups. So in essence, the conclusions were that avocado intake up to an avocado a day is weight neutral in these Latina women. So the HAT trial has been extended across multiple different centres now, and we see exactly the same kind of results. So this was the initial HAT trial, one a day for 6 months, no significant impact. But in a multi-centre trial, it also showed diet quality was improved over the 26 weeks, and there was no change in weight. A meta-analysis published just in 2022 showed avocado intake among overweight adults still showed no changes to weight, to fat mass, or to visceral fat. So again, fairly weight neutral. And then the scoping review coming out of Australia that I've just mentioned looked at the fact that, well, first of all, there were very few long-term randomized controlled trials, but overall, again, showing that avocado's effect on body weight was actually pretty weight neutral. So it's weight neutral, it doesn't promote weight gain, but it does have real benefits, improving diet quality, improving satiety. There's not adverse weight effects, and then we're seeing this knock-on cardiovascular and other health benefits. So it's time for us to rethink the advice we're giving around avocados, and perhaps to rethink. I know when I first started as a dietitian, we were really recommending a quarter of an avocado. This evidence is good to suggest that a serve size of half a medium avocado, which is about 75 grams, is a good one. And this is equivalent amount to a serve of vegetables. But this new evidence is supporting encouraging people to eat up to one avocado a day as part of a healthy diet to help to lower and manage blood cholesterol levels, and we can stop worrying about the risk of weight gain. Regularly, up to a whole avocado a day is not associated with weight gain, and in fact, the evidence is supporting very positive outcomes when it's part of an energy controlled diet, if you're looking for weight loss at least. But when we're just talking healthy diets, we can see that there's probably this knock-on effect on what else are they eating. It's likely that avocado is replacing or reducing the amount of other foods which may be less healthful in terms of what they're actually eating ad libitum. So the takeaway key messages here are that avocados are a nutrient-dense food that can play a very important role in any healthy diet. We've not got just healthy fats, there's also dietary fiber and a mix of different dietary fibers, and they contain more than 20 different nutrients and phytonutrients. Research is showing that eating avocados as part of a healthy diet has lots of different effects. Most research is in the area of cardiovascular health, showing improved lipid profiles, but other benefits too in cardiovascular health, that it can assist in weight management. And then there's those probably due to the fiber, but also due to those polyphenols. They act as prebiotics too. So we get this increase in the diversity and the abundance of the gut microbiota. And there's these potential then impacts on helping to maintain cognitive function and aging. And with an aging mum myself, who I've just spent a week with, I can tell you avocado is an easy food for them to eat. Once we get into those, 70 plus age group, my mum's 80, getting foods that they can actually eat with dentures, that they want to eat, that still have some flavor and taste, it can be really, really challenging. So I've actually found personally with my mum, avocados are one of the easiest things to get her to have daily. And there is also, skin appearance might be a way for us to appeal to younger audiences too, but also in terms of that aging, we know that there's those benefits in terms of skin health. So let's move on to extra virgin olive oil. What's in extra virgin olive oil? Well, again, it's not just monounsaturated fats. And this is where it's really important that we differentiate extra virgin olive oil from olive oil. So olive oil has been refined. It means you still get those healthy monounsaturated fats, but what you miss out on are all the active biophenols and other phytonutrients that are present in the oil. Those tend to get lost in the filtering process when you refine an oil. So again, similar to avocados, we have principally oleic acid, and that seems to have benefits itself, particularly for weight control. Monounsaturated fats seem to come out shining. Again, we get some vitamin E. Again, we get some phytosterols. But we've got this squalene. Squalene isn't present in very many foods. When we look at squalene as a supplement, mostly it's coming from shark liver, but we get it naturally in extra virgin olive oil. It's one of the best food sources. And squalene's a really interesting compound to look at because it tends to migrate and concentrate in the skin. And so it's thought to be one of the mechanisms behind lower rates of skin cancer in people who are following more of a Mediterranean type diet. So squalene's interesting. You might see it in your skincare ingredients for trying to plump up and hydrate skin, but it's certainly got an effect and likely a better effect when you're consuming it. And then we've got 30 plus active biophenols. I've given them a list and tried to categorize them there for you into the different groups. The ones where there's most research and excitement around are things like oleuropein and oleocanthal, tyrosol and hydroxytyrosol. So we could do, and I have done, and you can look past previous webinars we've done where we've looked more specifically and delved into some of the research behind these compounds. But I think the takeaway for us tonight or today is to really understand that these particular compounds have very specific effects. So if I go back, into the early part of my career where we were talking about the benefits of the Mediterranean diet, we didn't really know what all of the components were to understand the mechanistic effects. Now we understand that extra virgin olive is a very key player and it has roles outside of the Mediterranean diet. And that is a really nice takeaway too, that for our Asian clients or people from other backgrounds, the extra virgin olive oil has its own unique effects that stand alone regardless of what sort of a traditional diet, and including lots of whole foods that can benefit in there. There's also some minor components that might be important, carotenoids of course, but even the greenish colour is coming from chlorophyll and chlorophyll-like pigments. And that's contributing not just to the colour of extra virgin olive oil, but also to the smell, the taste, the flavour. So all of these things together are likely to be having an effect. And I threw in this slide, which I didn't want to, sort of show it for you for all of the different foods, but imagine if all fresh foods had this. And I think of this because I often get someone saying to me, oh, but isn't this shake or this these powders that you have in the morning or as a shake in the day are being advertised as being something that can kind of fulfill all your nutrition needs. And they look so impressive because they have this nutrition information panel on the back that looks so fantastic. And you see all of these different nutrients it contains and you think, oh my goodness, this is amazing. So imagine if we put that on real fresh foods. And so this is just a little bit of an example. And it's not even showing all of the nutrients because we've grouped the biophenols there, other than pulling out those four very key ones. It looks suddenly much more impressive. And I think it'd be useful for us as dietitians to show these kinds of things to people, to help them to understand that it's more than just fat. This is not just an oil, and this is what differentiates it, and what things like the Health Star rating system are not showing. Now, as I say, I do webinars on, the research behind extra virgin olive oil and their knock-on effects on health. So here I'm just going to take you through a very quick summary slide, but I urge you to look at the Olive Wellness Institute site. That is where you can see all of the research compiled. So you can click on the different areas of the body and actually look yourself and look at the research. But if I summarize it for you, essentially we've got work around glucose and insulin sensitivity, so blood sugar management. We see improved HbA1c, so it's a sign of your sensitivity to managing glucose over time. And we get a reduced risk of type 2 diabetes. Weight control is interesting because, again, and I'm going to show you more data here, we don't see weight gain with extra virgin olive oil, quite the opposite. In fact, we see better weight control, less weight gain over time, and especially a benefit around visceral fat. And interestingly, when you digest extra virgin olive oil, you get this compound EAA produced, which induces satiety. So it's a signaling mechanism to the brain, helping you to feel full. And that might explain some of the study results that we see, particularly with this type of oil. We get vascular effects, so we see reduced markers of inflammation, reduced oxidative stress markers, better endothelial function, which has a knock-on effect on blood pressure. We're seeing effects within the brain, again, probably coming from those biophenols that are neuroprotective. They actually go mostly to the gut microbiome, who convert those polyphenols into more bioactive compounds that can actually get up into the bloodstream, cross the blood-brain barrier, and they have this neuroprotective effect, reducing brain inflammation, improving cognition, improving mood, reducing the risk of neurodegenerative type diseases. Unsurprisingly, we know most about the benefits to the heart, so the lowering of the blood pressure I mentioned and blood lipids, but reducing oxidized LDL is a very, very key area. And we don't see that in regular blood screens around the world. We don't normally look at oxidized LDL. So that's a really important and might help us to understand what some of the differences are between studies and understanding why it's not sufficient just to look at someone's overall total cholesterol or even LDL cholesterol, because it matters what's oxidized LDL. So this helps to reduce atherosclerosis prevention, and we see a reduced risk of cardiovascular disease. There's even stuff coming out on the liver, so prevention of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, the prevention resolution of liver damage, and then within the gut. So polyphenols are one of the only groups of compounds outside of fibers that are, in some research groups, being called prebiotics because they do impact the gut microbiome. They encourage the growth of particularly beneficial bacteria. We're seeing a reduced risk of colon cancer, reduced inflammation, and this knock-on effect because there's such a close communication between the gut microbiome and your immune system. We get these immune health benefits. So let's just look then, if you go into PubMed and you start looking for extra virgin olive oil, you're going to get, honestly, thousands of papers. So I've tried to just pull out the latest. So these are 3 very important papers that are review and meta-analysis type papers from this year. So the first is on looking at the effect of olive oil consumption on diabetes. And unsurprisingly, given what we've just talked about, is that you see a decreased risk of diabetes with 10 to 20 grams. So that's not very much. That's just over 15 mils as a standard tablespoon. So just over a tablespoon a day, we're seeing those benefits in terms of the prevention and the management of diabetes. By the way, don't worry, you're going to get a copy of all of these slides, and I've put all the references on the final slides. So you've got all the reference list there for you. This second one, also published this year, is showing that extra virgin olive oil represents a valuable addition to dietary strategies aimed at reducing the global burden of cardiovascular disease. And then the final paper is again in the area of cardiovascular disease, and it tries to uncover a lot of the mechanisms behind it. What is going on? What is it in extra virgin olive oil that might be beneficial? And importantly, when we look at those mechanisms, it's the biophenols that are present in there, it's the type of fat, but it's also the interaction of extra virgin olive oil with other components of the diet, mostly those vegetables and other plant foods, helping to absorb other phytonutrients that are present across the board, helping to make food be tastier. So we probably eat more vegetables and more other plant foods when things taste good. So it's this interaction effect, both from a culinary and a nutrition aspects, that seems to be involved in the mechanisms. So if we're to summarize these new papers coming out, what we see is blood pressure reductions, improved endothelial function, a reduced risk of type 2 diabetes, reduced risk of cardiovascular disease, anti-inflammatory, so these are just CRP and interleukin-6 or inflammatory markers, improvements in blood lipids, and it certainly seems to be related to, let's call it the biophenol power. So the benefits are stronger with oils that are high in polyphenols. So, and the benefits come when we have at least that 2 tablespoons, preferably a day, of extra virgin olive oil. So again, we've got to reframe, and I really hope that the review of the Australian Dietary Guidelines is doing that right now. Now, if you've got still concerns around, but isn't that going to make me, and you're certainly going to get these questions, by the way, of course, from your clients and from consumers, this is a really great study to talk about. Again, just published this year. And this is looking in the United States at the studies you'll all be familiar with, the Nurses' Health Study, the Nurses' Health Study 2, which is a follow-up, and the Health Professionals Study, which is in men. So these have been ongoing studies, some of the longest running epidemiological trials, and they were looking at adding just half a tablespoon per day of olive oil, actually reduced weight. It didn't increase weight. And this was a linear relationship in this particular group. Notably, it's in America, so we didn't have any really high, or at least not in these study groups, really high consumers of extra virgin olive oil. So it was a linear relationship. So we don't quite know about that threshold, but I'm going to come to some Mediterranean diet studies in a second where they have much, much higher extra virgin olive oil intakes. So in contrast, we don't see that benefit when you have exactly the same number of calories, but from butter, from margarine, or from other oils, you see the opposite. In fact, you get weight gain. So in those substitution analyses, what they essentially see is that by replacing butter, margarine, or refined carbs with olive oil, you get less weight gain. And the effects were strongest, perhaps surprisingly, in participants with overweight and obesity. So the take-home message here is that higher olive oil intake is actually linked to less long-term weight gain, and it supports the importance of us talking more about fat quality, not fat restriction. So it's not detrimental to weight, and I just wanted to highlight here for you studies where the intakes were even higher. So these are around 50 mils a day. You'll be very familiar with the PREDIMED study. They showed very clearly, and what was important here is that this is a study over several years. So from memory, I think it's around 6 years here, 50 mils of extra virgin olive oil a day caused no excess weight gain. And actually there was a trend toward less visceral fat. In this second study, which is also a group from the PREDIMED study, energy density from extra virgin olive oil or from nuts was not associated with weight gain over 3 years. And then in this more recent study, published 2022, a Mediterranean diet rich in extra virgin olive oil, again, equaled less weight gain, a lower risk of obesity. And then this last one's quite interesting, although it's a very small trial, it was only 41 or so women. They gave them 25 mils of either extra virgin olive oil or soybean oil into breakfast. Overall, it was an energy restricted diet, but with a normal somewhere around 30, 32 from memory percent energy from fat. But what was interesting was that, in fact, although they were giving exactly the same amount of the two same, what we might call healthy fat oils, we got greater fat mass loss seen with the extra virgin olive oil based diet. So a really interesting little kind of pilot study there that shows that there might well be a difference between these types of fats. So our key messaging here is that fat quality matters. We can't just talk about calories or even just talking about monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, saturated fats. We can delve deeper into understanding this. Assessing foods based on calories is actually not in line with the evidence. There is a difference in terms of impacts on weight and on health based on where those calories are coming from. The bioactives in these foods, especially in extra virgin olive oil here, are playing major roles. And that's the difference between extra virgin olive oil and refined oils, including refined olive oil. And extra virgin olive oil has effects both as an individual food and as part of the Mediterranean diet. And the amount that the research is supporting is in that area of 2 to 3 tablespoons a day. And just to reiterate, you've heard me say this many times, you can and indeed should be cooking with extra virgin olive oil. So finally, let's move on to nuts. And nuts are just another great example of a food matrix that is incredibly complex. So in the past and even today, one of my fellow board members here on this trip was saying to me, oh yes, but we went to an almond plantation and we were all picking the almonds and eating the almonds off the floor. And she was saying to me, oh yeah, but they're so tasty. It's just hard not to overeat them. So I was able to reassure her and say it's pretty hard actually to overeat these kinds of foods because of their makeup and their nutrient complexity and nutrient density. So again, we've got healthy fats here, predominantly unsaturated. So depending on the nut, they're either higher in mono or polyunsaturated fats, and most nuts have very small amounts of saturated fat, certainly when we're talking tree nuts. So protein and fiber, we get about 20 grams of protein per 100 grams. That does vary between nuts. But importantly, they're really good sources of dietary fiber. So undoubtedly, that fiber is being involved in satiety and in gut health. I'll mention at this point too, one of the things that might be happening when we're consuming nuts in that whole form is that we've got great research to show us, in fact, we don't absorb all of the calories from nuts or the kilojoules from nuts, and we don't absorb all of that fat because of the matrix, because of the fiber present in the plant cell walls and the way that it's all packaged up together. Some up to 30% is actually being carried out the other end. So that has particular benefits. The fiber that's in nuts is playing various roles, binding toxins in the body, helping to control blood cholesterol, improving our satiety, improving the production of hormones like GLP-1 and other appetite hormones, helping us to feel full. So the likelihood is that when people are snacking and including nuts into their meals and snacks in the day, they're eating less of other foods, they're feeling satiated, they're getting those feedback mechanisms from all of the nutrients and from the energy density of the food, and that's helping to improve the overall quality of the diet. There's a bunch of different vitamins and minerals, and there are some differences between nuts that I'll highlight in just a second, because it's a question I often get asked, what's the best nut? What's the healthiest? And the answer is that they all shine for very different reasons. But generally, we're talking vitamin E, folate, magnesium. Nuts are actually one of our best sources of magnesium, potassium, calcium, zinc, selenium, and others. But we also get phytonutrients. So again, we see these biophenols with antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects showing up. We see plant sterols with their cholesterol lowering effect. But we also get things like L-arginine, which is a precursor for nitric oxide, improving blood pressure and vascular health. So when we look at individual nuts, I absolutely love this slide, and this is a great one for us to really highlight with clients. Eat a mixture. Diversity is a word I use all of the time, and I have to come up with get my thesaurus out and think of different ways to say this. But I talk all the time about diversity of diet, diversity of fibers, diversity of phytonutrients. Diversity is what gives us the balance of nutrients and phytonutrients that we need without getting too much of any one different thing. It's beneficial in our environment in terms of sustainability of diets, but it's also beneficial in terms of the foods that we eat. So when you're thinking about what's the healthiest nut, the answer is there is no healthiest nut. They all stand out. So peanuts are great they've actually got resveratrol, which is the same component that's in red wine and in grapes, that's been studied for anti-aging. We get B group vitamins like folate, niacin. Protein is across all of these nuts. Walnuts stand out for their plant omega-3s. Brazil nuts stand out for their selenium. Almonds have the highest level of calcium, but you're also getting some vitamin E. Chestnuts are low GI. They're very different to the other nuts on the page there, being that they're much, much lower in fat, and they are higher in carbohydrate, but they're low GI. Hazelnuts are fantastic for folate. They're high in biophenols. You get lutein and zeaxanthin in pistachios. Our Australian macadamias are really high in monounsaturated fats, incredibly versatile because they blend so well. I often use them in sauces and dipping type sauces and in my cooking. Pine nuts are wonderful for manganese. Pecans stand out for their antioxidant activity. And cashews, which often people think are like the naughty nut, actually have much more iron and zinc and copper, other minerals, magnesium, than some of the other nuts. So the bottom line is all of these things are fantastic for us and our clients to be consuming in our diets. So what's the research saying? Well, you won't be surprised to hear that there's benefits for blood lipid control. We see reductions in LDL. It doesn't seem to affect HDL. So we get these beneficial changes to the blood cholesterol profile with knock-on effects on cardiovascular disease. So potential benefits long-term, and that's what we've really seen with that healthy handful idea. We get this reduction in risk for cardiovascular disease. So what about weight? Well, this is again published this year, an umbrella review pulling into play the consumption of all sorts of different foods and linking with the risk of overweight and obesity. So huge numbers of participants, and they found that a high nut intake was actually associated with a reduced risk of overweight and obesity. And there was a dose response. So if you had that healthy handful a day, you'd have 5% lower risk of overweight and obesity. And long-term nut consumption is consistently associated with less weight gain and lower obesity risk when we look at those cohort studies. And these are all pretty high quality type studies. So despite being energy dense, regular nut intake is linked with a lower risk of overweight and obesity, not weight gain. Great title to this article, Are Fatty Nuts a Weighty Concern? It's another systematic review and meta-analysis, and we see a very similar thing. Higher nut intake linked with a lower instance of overweight and obesity and a reduced risk of gaining weight. This is 86 RCTs, so it's really great research. And so we can be quite confident in our conclusions that the worry that we have around nuts promoting weight gain is unwarranted. And finally, the meta-analysis here of 55 nut feeding trials, again, showing no weight gain in studies where participants added nuts without even adjusting their diet. We didn't see changes in body weight, in BMI, or waist circumference, even when nuts were being added on top of usual diets. So participants even saw a small but significant reduction in body fat percentage. So our take-home message has to be that nuts can be included freely in the diet without a risk of weight gain. Structured substitution may even enhance body composition. So encouraging people to use nuts is a really positive thing. So our take-home messages on nuts are that they're healthy fats, they're great sources of plant protein and of fiber, and we get that diversity again of different fibers. They can be used in a number of different ways, and we need to help people to understand how they can use these foods in different ways. And I would say particularly where people don't want to snack on a handful of nuts, we've got to teach them that nuts are actually very versatile to use in our cooking. Alleviate their concerns around, will I gain weight if I'm eating too many nuts? Actually, they're much more likely to help them to lose weight or at least to prevent weight gain. And the research is certainly supporting that healthy handful every day. So what's the practical take homes then? What are some things that we can do to help people to meet their, let's start with avocados. These are just some cooking culinary type ideas. And I've increasingly been working with people like my colleague Emma Sterling and others involved in this area of culinary nutrition. And I really ask you to embrace this because it's such a lovely way for us to bring nutrition science to life in a delicious way, but it's also about giving people the practical tools to take these foods into their diet and have fun with it. Make food delicious, make our recommendations delicious. That's how we get long-term change. So there's the obvious stuff like spreading and swapping mashed avocado for butter or for mayo and things like sandwiches, wraps, and of course on toast. But also it pairs so beautifully with eggs, with omelets, with baked eggs. We can use it in sushi and in rolls. We can stuff avocados as like this picture. They're really, really great baked actually. We don't always have to have avocado raw. So you can grill them or you can roast them. Really lovely either. Often I'll add them to the end, but you can stuff them and roast them full. They can be blended into soups. Chilled soups like gazpacho are really good, but you can blend in for that creaminess or add them into smoothies to give that kind of creaminess and deliciousness along with all of those nutrients present. Avocados work really well instead of butter in cakes, muffins, fruit loaves, brownies, all those sorts of things. Or, of course, the classic kind of avocado chocolate mousse. And they also work really well made into ice cream or into popsicles. They give that creamy texture while taking, especially if you're trying to create something that is dairy free, but you're adding those really healthy nutrients in at the same time as creating something that works in a culinary way. In terms of extra virgin olive oil, we need to move people beyond the idea of salad dressings. Of course, extra virgin olive oil is a no-brainer to be used in a dressing, but it also adds delicious flavor as a finishing oil drizzled over practically any meal. Of course, for cooking, so roasting, grilling, frying, and baking, it works exceptionally well. You can even drizzle it onto sweet dishes. So when you do overnight oats or even over your porridge, extra virgin olive oil is delicious put over that. One of the meals that we had at lunchtime today from one of our local chefs here, they did these beautiful dips, one of a Lebanon, one of a beetroot dip, and he drizzled extra virgin olive oil over the top, along with sprinklings of various chopped nuts and seeds. And then the avocado was in the salads. It was a really wonderful culinary display of everything that we're talking about tonight. You can make your own infusion. So, I get a little jar and I put a chili or some garlic or some lemon rind, or even the rind of a Parmesan. When you get down to the end of your block of Parmesan, pop it into your extra virgin olive oil and you make your own infusion that you can then use for marinating. People are getting into pickling and marinating and preserving and so on. So there's lots of different ways to use extra virgin olive oil. And finally, when it comes to nuts, I've been doing some really lovely nut crusts on Good Chef, Bad Chef, and they work really, really well on fish and chicken particularly. Soups and stews, breakfast bowls, adding crunch and texture to salads. Blend them yourself to make your own nut butters or make them into dips, add to smoothies. Of course, on frozen desserts, I do a lovely one with dark chocolate where I then sprinkle over my nuts and seeds and so on onto the top of the dark chocolate, put it back in the freezer, and you make a kind of bark with your nuts entailed into it. And then they work really well in stir fries and curries, either blended to give that creaminess. Cashews and macadamias work particularly well in that regard, or you can just add them whole into something like a stir fry. And one of my favorite snacks is using a kind of trail mix with berries, dark chocolate, and my nuts that I often have in the afternoon. So to take it home before I take some of your questions, it's time for us to shake off that low-fat hangover for good. We need to reframe fats so that we talk more about the quality and we assure people about that quality rather than this constant reduce fat message. Avocado, extra virgin olive oil, and nuts are nutrient-dense foods. They're rich in phytonutrients. They're fantastic sources. The nuts and the avocado are fantastic sources of fiber. And we're getting this extra benefit. This food matrix is so important that we start to talk about a little bit more. High fat does not equal weight gain when you're having it from these kinds of whole foods that have all of these additional nutrition benefits, and the evidence is showing neutral or beneficial effects on weight. So in fact, these foods can support weight control, improve satiety, and long-term proven benefits are strong for cardiovascular and metabolic health. So I want to thank, first of all, that this project's been funded by Hort Innovation. So avocados, nuts have been involved along with the olive wellness industry. So thank you to all of these people. And you'll see in my final slides, I have given you all of the reference lists, and we'll be able to share those slides with you so that you have all of those references to hand. So thank you. I'm going to hand back to Tim, and then we can take some of your questions. Are you there, Tim? Tim, are you okay? Do you want me to do the questions from the Q&A? I'll just go straight into this. I'm not sure if it's only me that can't hear Tim or whether you can't either. I'll just launch into some of these questions because I can see them in the Q&A box. Holly, Charlton Holly, you're asking, what are my thoughts on whole peanuts versus peanut butter? Do you think one is significantly better than the other due to processing versus not? Well, that's a really interesting one. In terms of nut butters, the benefits is for people like my mum who really can't have whole nuts anymore. Nut butters are the way for me to get nuts into her diet, either into smoothies or make them into nut butters, and then she can have it on her toast or onto a cracker. So the likelihood is that we absorb more of the fats. You probably don't get that calorie deficit so much. You probably do get more of the energy out of a nut butter because you help to break down some of those plant cell walls. But that also you'll still get all of the fibers, and you will certainly get more of the nutrients, and you're potentially absorbing then more of the phytonutrients. So I think that nut butters are a great idea. We should absolutely have nut butters. And there's great evidence behind peanuts and peanut butter. I would, of course, be encouraging, however, people to at least be making sure they read the ingredients list to make sure there's not anything other nasty added. Oh, Glenn Cardwell, you're giving me a word. Is this just a test to see if I can pronounce this? Eurifagus. I love that you put it in brackets after a person or animal that eats a wide variety of foods. I love that. Oh, I just learned a new word, Glenn. Thank you. We should be euriferous with nuts and quality foods in general. Totally agree. I'm writing that word down so I remember. What about seeds like flax seeds, chia seeds, pumpkin seeds? Yes, absolutely. We focused here on tree nuts. And I have to say that a lot of the research is looking at tree nuts rather than specifically at seeds. But nutritionally, we see a lot of similarities between nuts and seeds. So yes, there is great research. Chia and flax seeds stand out, of course, for their ALA content, but also for their phytonutrient antioxidant potential. Vitamin E is very high in things like pumpkin seeds. So yes, I would certainly be encouraging the consumption of seeds as well. We just probably have slightly less research around seeds or there's research into individual seeds rather than into tree nuts that we focused on tonight. I'm not sure whether avocado is available in India or is it only imported or cultivated. I'm afraid I don't know. Maybe anyone else knows about the cultivation of avocados in India. I'm here in California, and I can certainly say there is huge here in California avocados. So yes, I'm not sure, or perhaps we're exporting them to India from Australia. If one avocado a day is recommended, how much of the other foods rich in healthy fats should be consumed? So we're saying one avocado a day, 2 to 3 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil, and a handful of nuts. So that 30 grams or so of nuts is what's coming out from the research. Okay, I don't think I've got any more questions. Tim, are you still there? Or Sarah, if Tim's having a problem with his connection, do you want to jump back in?
Yeah, Jo, there's a few that are coming through on the chat. If you just want to jump over there.
Oh, they're in the chat. Yeah, okay. Oh, the Q&A is not working. Oh, I see. Okay. Some people are having problems with the Q&A. Let me just quickly then go through your chat questions. Do you replace avocado gram for gram in baking instead of butter? Oh, that's a really good question. And actually, I'm going to be very hesitant in answering because I'm not quite sure. I can tell you when we replace butter with extra virgin olive oil, we usually do about 3/4 of the amount. But I think for avocado, I'm imagining it would be somewhat similar because it's much more of a similar sort of food and you have other components present, whereas with extra, butter has some water present, as does a whole avocado. So I think it would be similar, but don't take my word on that. Extra virgin olive oil, can we use it if it's more than 2 years old? Well, yes, you can, but I wouldn't recommend it, but I wouldn't recommend any oil that's over 2 years old. I think there's an awful lot of focus on, well, does extra virgin olive oil go off and other oils are somehow not going off, when that's not true. All oils actually should be used within a certain date. So I would always make sure when I'm buying extra virgin olive oil, I always look in the bottle to see a harvest date. And then that allows me to know, is it this year or last year's harvest, so that I know I'm getting a relatively new oil. And the most important thing is once you've opened that bottle, when a good quality olive oil company is going to bottle the oil and make sure that there's no air on the top, that it's a dark bottle, that it's been kept at the right temperature, and that's going to best preserve your oil. But the minute you've opened it at home, of course, air is getting into the bottle. Are you storing it on the side of your kitchen next to the cooker, or is it in a cool pantry? All of those things will start to use it. So generally, we would say to buy extra virgin olive oil, preferably within a year of the harvest, and be using it up, certainly not more than 2 years old, but once you open the bottle, use it up within about 6 weeks. In the HAT study, where daily avocado did not result in weight gain. Was this because the avocado replaced other potentially energy-dense foods, or the avocado supported appetite management and this resulted in a reduction of other energy-dense or ultra-processed foods? Yes, this was an ad libitum trial. They were adding in an avocado a day. So the likelihood is, yes, they were reducing their intake of other types of foods. And I think that that's the key thing when we include these energy dense foods. And when you look, I've been reading an awful lot more around, because there's such a plethora of conversations around GLP-1 drugs. I've been looking at what research is there behind what influences your GLP-1 naturally, along with other appetite hormones. And one of the things is fat and calories in the and protein and fiber will also make differences. So I think what's happening here is that we are getting this signaling system back to the brain, so that you're then not having, people don't then have their hand in the biscuit tin, or they're eating less of other things because they're feeling satisfied with their meals. I mentioned that chestnuts have a higher carb content. Should these be avoided if you're on a low carb diet? Well, I mean, that depends on, nobody's eating a massive amount. I guess if you're using chestnut flour, you might end up with a significant amount of carbohydrate. But no, I wouldn't necessarily. It depends on how low carb your diet is. And then I would be just simply looking at the quantity. But they're low GI. So I don't think anyone's really overeating chestnuts. All right, so much focus on refined seed oils at the moment. Would love to hear your thoughts on seed and avocado oils. My view on this is that seed oils are getting unjust claims thrown at them. I'm here in the States, and there's an awful lot of misinformation that is coming out of the government and the nutrition department or the health department, not from people who are actually qualified in giving any kind of nutrition advice. But the problem is that that's fueling a lot of misinformation. So I do think when we look clearly at the evidence, we actually don't see strong evidence of seed oils increasing inflammation. We actually do see evidence of benefit, particularly when saturated fat sources are replaced with seed oils. However, they are refined processed oils that use high pressure, high heat. There are potential traces of compounds in those oils then that may not be good for us, but we don't fully understand that yet. And what I'll just say is that they lack the biophenols and the other phytonutrients that are present in something like extra virgin olive oil and in avocado oil. So I don't mind some avocado oil. It's just less prominent, less used. And avocado oil tends to be made from the not so good avocados. So, I would like to see some research around the end phytonutrient breakdown of what's present in an avocado oil. And I've not really seen that evidence. So we've got great evidence, but it's another monounsaturated oil. And there is great evidence around whole avocados. So yeah, I would be encouraging people to have those kind of cold pressed nut oils, good quality avo oil, and then your extra virgin olive oil is the one that is really well researched and definitely giving us benefits over those other oils. Okay, 1 minute left. Is there one more question? Someone asking about India. I'm assuming that's the same oil. We talked about seed oils. Do avocados actually contain histamine, or is it just another myth? Oh, I'm sorry, I can't answer that question for you. I would have to look that one up. Ideas about keeping your nuts from going rancid, please. Look, if you have space in your fridge, then by all means, a great idea to put your nuts in the fridge. If you want to keep them longer, then yes, you can put them in the freezer. Fantastic. But most of us, I don't know about you, but I don't have room in my fridge or my freezer for my nuts. So I actually keep them in my pantry. But what I do try to do is to make sure that I rotate them. So I don't buy nuts in such big a bag that they're then sitting unused in the pantry for time on end. Okay, and last question then, I've just in the last minute, what about eating olives, black or green? You can have them both. There's actually benefits to both. You get slightly different phytonutrients. It's really just around the ripeness of the olive. So enjoy your black and your green olives. Okay, Sarah, I'll hand back over to you.
Thank you so much, Jo. It's been a really great hour of questions and of learning, and there's been, some really great questions in chat coming through. If you do have any further questions that we didn't get to, please send across an email to info@olivewellnessinstitute.org. We will be sending out an email after this. And thank you, Jo, for jumping in for that Q&A. There's a few tech issues that we will have to look into afterwards so we can keep doing webinars through Teams moving forward. But thank you so much for your time, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.